Now, like any good planner, I'll begin with a few caveats. Nothing I'm going to show you is particularly innovative. People like Rachel Ryan and Richard Simpson have done this stuff before. And the other one is, for a young planner to speak after Professor Onishi is quite an asymmetric relationship. So, yes, and I'll probably break this. The first question I've got for you is, do you know what urban planning is? Because urban planning is a lot like driving. We've all seen cars, we've all driven cars, therefore we're experts on driving. And it's not always like that. I mean, take a simple question. Who built your house? It wasn't an urban planner. And that's the level of control we have. Planners don't build anything, really. We referee, we stop the decisions of other people building things from too badly affecting other people's buildings. We're kind of like moderators and referees, and quite often we either get it wrong or we get stuck in the middle of a horrible fight. So, as a brief introduction, this is what Wellington looked like in about 1840. Over here was the Pipitea Pa, and here we're standing on Plymouth Steps. Plymouth Steps is the little lane down by Lambton Quay with the little statue on it. By 1841, that happened. 1841 is an interesting year because not only had we just had the treaty signed and the European settlement established, we also had the first beginnings of the City Council. And that grew out of what you can see there. Essentially, Wellington began on the beach, which is why the streets are curved in places. Organic city planning, i.e. building where the first place your feet aren't wet, will only get you so far in life. You start to need structures. In Wellington, you might notice we have all these blasted hills. So that wasn't too suitable for initial settlement. And then we had a rather interesting event. We thought, oh, right, that harbour's not too deep, we'll reclaim it. So we laid out our first urban plan, and then we had an earthquake. And between earthquakes and my forebears, that happened. Now, this is where you start to get planning rules. Wellington was obsessed with two things in the early days, fire and earthquakes. So initially, we banned the construction of stone buildings, which is why the old main cathedral is made of wood, even though it looks like it should be made of stone, is because we'd just seen all the stone buildings fall down. We're not going to do that again. But then, well, the city burnt down, didn't it? So we can't get anything right. So we introduced new regulations, and those new regulations resulted in a city that by the 1930s looked like this, vaguely. Buildings are all stone, or reinforced brick of some description, and fairly flat, etc. By the 1990s, or today actually, those concerns had changed. Building technology had moved on, plans had moved on, and the Central Business District went ahead. Plymouth Steps, where we were standing in 1841, was cut away completely, and now we sit in somebody's office. Or, to put it more bluntly, this is 1938, and this is now. So, it's quite a change. And all of this happened because, well, people built a city. And the shape of the city was influenced by planners. What we've done is, essentially, we establish expectations. That's all planning is. What do you expect to happen in the future? If you own a farmyard, you don't expect a skyscraper to be there, to be next to it. And that's what planning's doing. And then we come to the digital earth. Initially, I was a bit mystified by this idea of a digital earth. I have trouble getting to grips with the real one, to be honest. And then I received some instructions from Philippa over there. She said, we're going to become a digital city. So I said, okay, what does that mean? Well, planning, I know this is going to grieve you, is not a scientific system. It's a democratic system. That's why we get some strange outcomes occasionally. And in order for us to have a digital earth that planners can inhabit, we need a digital democracy. And in a digital democracy, data is a public good, Therefore, planning's data must become a public good. And what do you know? Suddenly, we're an open source, though I'm speaking an incomprehensible language. And so what we did was we started going, well, we'll bring in the information digitally. This is how we used to receive all our information. It's very interesting, but what does it mean? So now we come to what I'm trying to do. At the moment, we have Stan. Stan's the man with the plan. He wants to put an addition on his house. Stan comes and sees me. I will now force him to understand the entire planning system. I don't mean read that map, I mean this. He needs to read this, then he needs to read this, then he needs to find it there, and I didn't even bring the supplementary volume. So essentially, all we're trying to do is this. Stan just needs to understand how his house fits in. He doesn't need to know about the structure of the city, and that's deliberately blurry because naturally when you're making all these rules, there's a lot of risk. So if we make them fuzzy, we can't get crucified on them. So to start with, we started to bring in this data. Those show bus stops. And then we've like, well, shading's important, so we started playing with our models to shade. And then somebody asked me, where's government? It's 17% of our economy. Well, that's what 17% of our economy looks like in that neighbourhood. Those are all the different offices. They're not graded by size or anything, it's just where they are. And then I thought, well, I can start expressing things. These are heritage buildings. So in those purple boxes are buildings that are covered by planning regulations which will preserve them. And the interesting thing is, this building here, only the facade is protected. Yet if you looked at it on the two-dimensional map over there, you wouldn't know that. It's just got a dot. So suddenly, I have to say what I mean, which is good, because then I have to mean what I say, or else I'll get crucified in court. And then we could bring in other data. These are heritage buildings as well, but those yellow ones are the ones that are below 33% of the building code. And then those are earthquake-prone buildings as well. And then we come to what we're actually doing. So some of those people, when they go and build something, are going to need consent. So here's our site. This is our planning envelope. These are the expectations drawn out into 3 dimensions. So that's the height limits, and I put a little edge control on there. Somebody comes along and puts an application in. He's over height. He's gone beyond the expectations of the plan. It's more than his neighbours can rightly expect to be there, and therefore he'll need to get some sort of consent. And we can do it 2 ways. We can either prove that he can either design it so he's not shading anybody, not interrupting any views, etc., and therefore you've mitigated the environmental effects and permission can be granted. The other way we can do it is we can notify all the neighbours and they can say, no, there's no problem, and permission will be granted. Or we can go after the Environment Court, have a horribly litigious battle, and probably use his building budget. And so when we started to smash it up, this is what it looked like. This is your site. These are the rules that apply to it with the trigger points. So you're allowed to cover all of your site, 100%. There are no sunlight access planes on these sites except at the back here. And whilst this seems like a bloody obvious thing to do and quite simple, every one of these sites has a slightly different form of land zoning on it, with a different height and a different recession plane or some other form of weird and wacky thing we've thought up. And you can do the same for heritage buildings. And the interesting thing about this is we could start to bring in other data. So we know, being council, we know a fair bit about when the building was built, why it's important, etc. That's why we listed it. So we thought, oh, we can put a link to that on it as well. And then we thought, why don't we try and attack the core of the plan? So this is, I made this, I didn't make this, it's not my fault. These are approach fans to the airport. I made this after I got rung up by a nice lady from Miramar out here. She said, "I can't see the lasers, Sean." And I said, "I can't see lasers either. What's the problem?" She said, "Those yellow lasers coming out of the airport should be shining into my husband's yacht when he comes in, but he can't see them." "Well, madam, that's not because they're not lasers. These are recession planes. Essentially, these are what stop you building a building that a plane will smash into." Well, they look like that, actually, in 3D, and suddenly it becomes a little bit clearer. I would have bought in the model we can fly around and play with it, but I break things, so that wasn't a good idea. And then we thought, oh, we'll do it to the plan. So we modelled the height limits, and then the variable height limits. So this is a minimum height limit, this is a maximum height limit, and forgive me, this is an absolute maximum height limit. I told you we were incomprehensible. That's the heritage planners for you. They get a little bit high camp with their language at times. And I don't know if I've included it. Oh, yeah, the view shafts. Oh, broke it. And then I made the edges glow for the other rules. The interesting thing is, this image represents about 100 pages of that plan. And I doubt, quite frankly, if you read those 100 pages, whether you would actually come up with this idea. And then we thought, what else can we use it for? So we started to play with it, and we found that we can export into SketchUp, which is fun, because then we can put people's buildings inside it and see what hangs out, and that lets us assess them much more quickly. The other thing it lets us do is we can turn the politicians loose. We've never done this before, and it's highly dangerous, but essentially, we let them push and pull up the building envelopes, so they can make the shape of city that they want, and then we can show them why it doesn't work. But again, that starts to get into that wisdom of crowds. If everybody's pushing and pulling those envelopes, somehow we must get to some sort of right answer, hopefully. It also allows us to start having conversations with developers going, actually, this building here is earthquake prone. It doesn't have a great deal of height limit left. Therefore, either we need to look at some sort of plan change, or they are going towards the strengthening side of things, because quite frankly, you don't pull down a building and then replace it with something the same size unless you just don't like the building to start with. And so as we move through, we've discovered that this becomes a public good. We can now, once I've got it all complete, we'll have our core little system, which is what we'll take to the Environment Court and let the judges play with, and that will be the hand on heart, this is what the rules are. But there's no reason why that can't be sent out for open sourcing, because all sorts of people will do all sorts of things with it. One thing I would use it for is if I was putting in an application if I was lobbying for light rail or something, I'd calculate the development capacity on that route. And it also allows a symmetry in our relationships with our communities. Previously, we'd put out a plan change. Say I was going to put this in. I'd put out a 40-page document saying, I'm going to put in a view shaft, here's all the environmental effects, here's all this. Can you comment on it, please? And people would go, what is that? They wouldn't understand. They'd see a 40-page document and not read it. I mean, how many of you are gripped by the urge to read that over there? I'm not, and I'm paid to. Suddenly, as we get these three-dimensional platforms that can go through the web, that symmetry begins to even out. Now people can do their own view shaft analysis using different engines and go, why have you selected that view? You want to select that one over there. And they can come up with real alternatives rather than a sketch on the back of a napkin, which will probably be demolished in front of councillors in quite a humiliating way, to be honest. So, as we move into this new world, it means that people like me are becoming kind of accountable, which is a new idea for us. Previously, we were incomprehensible, so... But what it's also meant is that we're starting to understand what the digital earth is. It's a digital democracy. And what Carlo Ratti was talking about those actuators, we start to become one of those actuators. The vision for the city is is placed into the plan by the people. And then it's up to us to express it through engines like this so that they can interact with it. It also means that we can begin to talk as equals, as you should in democracy. And suddenly, our digital Earth starts to become our real Earth. The other thing that it's really underlined to us is the digital Earth is not a thing. I don't throw my data at it. The digital Earth's an idea. And what you need is apostles in different professions to bring it about. When I first arrived at the place, we were playing with paper maps. Our GIS boys were way ahead, but to be honest, we weren't listening. When we began to actually play with this stuff and take it to meetings, suddenly other planners wanted to play with it, to the point where I'm not pushing it anymore, I'm pretty much restraining them. And it's that digital apostleship that we really need. I mean, we were told the best missionaries are the ones that preach the gospel and, if necessary, use words. Well, I don't even need to use words. We might even get to a post-reading age, because, quite frankly, nobody reads anything outside the subject area anymore. So